It's a long word, I think. I don't know, participative way. It was underlining it on the thing as if it was. I'm sure it's not spelling.
No, I kept checking.
Yeah, okay, so Sonia. Okay.
So just a warning that I'm just videoing myself because it's part of my methodology is to use a living theory methodology, which I'll talk about. So if you're happy, it's only videoing me, it's not videoing you. But if you're happy that I can use the questions at the end, although it might not work now because we're going to have everybody's questions, but we'll see how it goes. Anyway, so my question, I've done this more like a paper as opposed to my entire PhD. So I'm just looking at one element of something that I've been doing as part of my work. So my question is, how can I work participatively with carers to improve the education of social work students? So, sorry for those of you who were at my last presentation and had to listen to what living theory was, but I thought I'd just start off by going through the type of methodology that I'm using. So it's a living theory methodology. So it's just a kind of very quick overview. If you want to know more about it, I'd suggest you go to actionresearch.net, where there are lots of living theory papers. It's all open source, so it's fantastic. You can get whatever you want from there. But the key ideas of living theory is that it's ethically driven and that you have personal responsibility for your research. It's a values-based approach, and the idea is that you're looking for your values and merging in your practice. So you're looking to see what are the key values to you. We all hold lots and lots of values, but there are some values that emerge that are our key values that we really hold very dear to us, and that they're the things that we're really aiming to work towards. So there's something called a methodological inventiveness, and that means that because of the way that our values emerge in practice, because it's ethics-based, the types of methodology that we use are going to be different for each person because they're going to fit your type of methodology. And so it's around looking for what are those ways of working that really fit and work for you in terms of your methodology. There's one I really like because it's kind of what addresses you could do a great piece of research but it may not have any benefit. In fact, it could harm humanity, whereas living theory is very much involved in trying to do something that is responsible for human flourishing. So making sure that we're actually doing some good for people in the world. It's really interested in lots of different levels of learning. So it starts with an I question. How can I improve what I'm doing? How can I improve my practice? And therefore there's learning for myself. However, it's also interested in the learning of others. So there's another layer to it. And that may be your participants, it may be the people that you're involved with at work, it could be involved in your practice. So there's this other layer. So they're usually the people who are quite close to you and probably know you. So there is, around that kind of learning to your immediate environment. But there's also something that, again, really interests me, which is the learning of social formations. How can we take that out and beyond ourselves? How can we actually have an impact beyond just our immediate environment? And I'm guessing that the majority of us are interested in that, otherwise we probably wouldn't be doing a PhD where you're actually taking that learning and thinking about where that goes. So that kind of takes us to this living standard of judgment. We are living our values, and therefore we judge ourselves against our values. So we come up with these things that are very interesting to us. We say what our key values are, but then we actually judge ourselves against those values. So we're not judging ourselves against an external criteria, we're coming up with our own criteria to judge ourselves against. Right, I'm not going to spend as long on the other slides as that, but that just gives you the understanding of what we're looking at. So, what was I looking at? I was looking at carer participation. So I work with people who care for somebody in their family who's not very well. And what I was finding was that carers were very interested. That overarching view was that the thing that really mattered to them, if you like, was that carers wanted social work students to understand there is no single story of caring. Dietrich talks about this. It's a TED talk. It's also open source. You'll see I like open source. So you can go and watch that story about no single story. It's about the fact there are lots of different stories. And the carers are very interested in not telling a social worker that this is my story and therefore that's what you should judge carers on, but that you need to understand there are lots of stories of caring. Okay. So what I was understanding was that my value of participation and including people meant that there was also a thing that I needed to get my balance of power right. And Heron talks about this being between everyone in the learning process. We need to balance this power. And carers coming in are automatically feeling out of balance with the power because social work students are learning a profession. They are not a professional, they are a layperson providing care to somebody, and therefore there was a lot that we had to get over with that feeling of power. I was in a position of power. I'm the chief executive of the Carers Centre that was running the work that we were teaching up at the university, teaching the students. So I had to recognise that I had some power over the carers, and how did we overcome all of those issues of power? So, as well as being a living theory, it's very interesting in the eye. So I wanted to look at my ethno-autobiography. Why am I interested in social work education? Why is it important to me? This is my lovely family, not all of them because I couldn't find enough pictures of them all, but the ones that I could find. And so what I was really interested in is, in this picture, a family is my biological family and my foster family. I was fostered as a child. That means I've had a lot of experience of social workers. If you've ever been through the care system or worked with people in the care system, you're forever meeting social workers. So I had lots of personal reasons why I was interested in social work. But I'm also still a carer of my mum. My mum owns a villa, and we went to go and see my brother. She can be very unwell at times, and she has schizophrenia, and she also has drug issues. And so what that meant is that I still come across a lot of social workers in my personal caring history, but I run a carers centre, so I come across a lot of issues with social workers from carers, and when they're having problems with social workers, and how they overcome those. So I've got this multi-layered reason for being interested in this. So I've been doing this for quite a long time. I've been working with social workers up at the University of Bath for about 9 years now. And it started when I was a young carers manager, so the job previous to this one. There's a lot of research around young carers. If you're interested in it, then there are some of the key bits of research that have been done. But quite a lot of research around young carers, but nothing that I've come across which looks at the influence that they have on the practice of social workers, particularly in what we were doing by becoming part of the degree course. So we actually took social workers up to the university. This had lots of positive impacts because what I was finding is what Heron and Reason talk about is that there's this part to participation, is both to mould and to encounter. So what we were finding is that it's a two-way co-creative process. The young people get to be introduced to the level of study to become a social worker, and the students get this unique experience and insights direct from the young people themselves. So I was lucky enough to be able to be involved with a book that was published, and we were able to talk about this in 2009 when we took the students up. So some of these images are from that book, and some of that learning was good because we've captured that and we've publicised that as well. So we were able to come up with things like visual presentations. So here you've got a good social worker and a bad social worker, and cut down the middle. And I was able to help with the young carers really saying to the students, this is what we see as good and this is what we see as bad in social work practice. And that started to develop for the social workers what that model looked like. Lots of issues around using good and bad, but these were the language of the young people. So these young people were under 80, can't quite remember how young they went down to, but quite young, and good and bad worked for them. They understood what they were talking about. So many of the young carers unfortunately had very negative experiences with social workers, and when they'd been working in their families. So participating enabled the young carers to encourage the next generation of social workers to work differently. That was very important to the young carers because they were recognising they weren't going to impact what they were currently receiving, but they were able to impact on the next generation and have a benefit there. So, fast forward a little bit, I moved on, I became Chief Executive of the Carers Centre. It was predominantly an adult, it was completely an adult service to begin with. We do now work with young carers, but it meant I wanted to continue this work that I've been doing with social work students. And so I decided that I'd do this as a particular piece of research because I felt that would make it quite an interesting additional layer, if you like, to the work. So what I found was when I invited adult carers to come forward, there was this very mixed confidence level. So some people came back and said, oh, this is really exciting. Yes, I'd love to do that. I'm really looking forward to it. And then this other one, oh, well, let me know what you want, and if you want me to, so much more, they weren't sure, but they were interested. They probably were a bit excited and a bit looking forward to it, but they were much more hesitant about, well, I'm not the expert here, whereas actually they really, really are the experts, and that was something that kind of happened. And the other thing that came out, and I put this in this paper because I think this is really important. Whenever you're doing anything, people talk about, these lovely aims and output and outcomes and all of that stuff, but actually their practical needs were really important. They needed to know where they're going to get some expenses, because they may not have been able to afford it to do it if they weren't going to get those. We also provided a level of payment, so we had a policy around that. That was really important that they knew that, and that had impacts and benefits and all sorts of things. So we had to go through that with them. Some of them needed care cover. They couldn't actually come and leave the person they were caring for unless there was care cover. They needed lunch. We all need lunch. I needed lunch. It's very important. They needed transport, or they needed a way to be able to get up there and to be able to actually take part. So all that stuff's really important. And if you don't put that as a basic part, and that was one of my first questions that I had from them all, was like, yes, how are we getting all of this? So that's really important. So this covered a time period. So in 2012-13, we had 10 sessions and 6 carers, a kind of a start-off group. I include myself in that number of carers because I actually worked not just as the chief executive of the charity, but wanted to work participatively as a carer in this research. But then we decided in 2013 that we'd send an invitation out to other carers and invite them. So we sent them to all the carers that we worked with. And then we did 4 more sessions. There were 9 carers. They weren't 3 additional carers. There was kind of this crossover because some of that 6 decided that it was time for them to leave or they couldn't continue, and so we got new carers. So it's not quite as clean, never is, as it sounds, so that's fine. So we did lots of different workshops. So the first lot of workshops that we did this twice over. We did a discrimination and empowerment workshop looking at the inequalities that carers face. So the key things, and this is a picture, carers on this side, students on that side, and I don't know what they're called, lecturer of social work on that side. So it's kind of a nice show of this kind of participation of all these people that were involved. And we really wanted to look at different areas that carers face discrimination or empowerment in. So we looked at employment, finance, health and well-being, leisure and free time, and relationships with family, professionals and family. So I've just tried to kind of cover these. I'm not going to go into a great load of detail, but carers learning aims for the students, but that they wanted the students to understand that they've experienced social workers have preconceived ideas of them. They thought it was very important, they wanted to get that across, and that leads them to feel devalued. So that was a key learning aim that they wanted to get across. That social workers often assume that carers can cope, that there are hidden costs of caring. Often you're having to pay for things that other people don't have to pay for. That confidentiality can be used as a weapon. Now, we had lots of ways of describing this. What they were trying to say is, they say that I can't talk to you about the person you care for because it's confidential, rather than trying to find an open way of talking about the person that they care for to help them to continue caring. And that generally leads to a lack of information. And in fact, just being a carer, there just seems to be a general lack of information, and social workers weren't seeming to fill that gap for them. So, with that in mind, they were the learning aims that the carers put together for themselves to try to get across to students. You'll see that we did achieve some of these, and we developed this over 2 years, so there's an improvement here. So we did 1 year, and then we did the next year, and we learned as we went along as well. So students came back to us and they gave us some feedback, and they said that they understood that carers were discriminated by professionals. Hurrah! That each situation is unique. Great, we got that major thing that carers are not all the same. There's not one way fits all. That they must involve carers. They got that message quite loud and quite clear, that actually it's really important that happens. And that they should then go away and research and give information. Just saying they don't know is not good enough, actually. They are the social worker involved in the care, and that they need to go and find some stuff out. That they should use confidentiality to be supportive, hooray again, because that's so important for social workers to understand that. And a really key thing, and something that I was really pleased about, is that there's a need to be recognised as a carer, and that often social workers are not recognising carers and what they're doing, and that massively devalues them. So if they can understand that, we kind of hit our learning aims, essentially. But what was really good about this is it wasn't just about feeding information into social workers and then getting the job done. What I really wanted to get from this was a cycle where carers were learning as well and that they were developing themselves through the process. And what was great is we had a lot of reflective sessions to work out what was the learning that we were doing as carers and how could we take that forward. So we learnt things about the process. We learnt that we needed to give time for questions, and in the second time round we had a question and answer session, which was really, really successful. We learnt that we could bring other carers in who weren't able to get to the university by the use of video. There was a lot of learning that needed to be got through that, but that was a learning outcome. We learnt that we did miss some perspectives, that you can't ever get every carer there from every perspective ever, but that we need to somehow get across that there are lots of different types of perspectives and we're not the only ones. That we needed to show the complexities of caring, and that was a continual kind of debate for us. How do we show all these complexities? So we were always learning that that's quite difficult, even though we know that those complexities exist. We did learn that the students were learning, which was great, because so that helped with that confidence level of those carers that said, oh, I don't know if you want me to, tell me what to do and I'll do it. It meant that actually these carers were really fundamental in these students learning, doing a degree programme, and some of these carers didn't even have GCSEs or A-levels or any of that stuff. So actually being able to say you are an expert in what you do because you're a carer, because of your lived experience, you're helping somebody to learn. And that there was more to improve. We didn't come away going, yes, we've got this perfect model, now we can just roll this out everywhere and it'll work for all the time. There's a lot more to learn and a lot more to improve. Sorry. So the second part of it is that we needed to do student assessment. The university wanted carers to be involved in the assessment of students, not just in the teaching. Now this was quite challenging for some of the carers because they were concerned about the fact that how can I assess a degree level student if I don't even have a degree, I don't even have any qualifications. And so what we're trying to kind of encourage alongside the university staff is that you're an expert in what you are doing, and actually your assessment is about whether or not this person should be allowed to go and speak to a carer and whether or not they're capable of that. So then that came up with a whole new set of things that we wanted to see whether students were picking up on an understanding. But the understanding they had to have empathy towards carers, that they needed to have good communication skills, that they needed to be non-judgmental, and that they needed to have discernment. So we found again that the student learning increased over this, and we're talking to first year students here, so this was great. So the carers decided to use role play, and that was very effective, we found out, because of the feedback from the students. So this was developed through group discussion with the students after they'd watched the role play. So the learning increased by doing the role play and then having a group discussion. And they were learning that they needed to be empathic, which was great, one of our learning outcomes again. But they recognised that active listening is important, so communication. That they needed to build rapport, and that all carers are different, which is brilliant because this meant that first year students were learning that all carers were different, not even wait until the second year to learn that. So that was really great. So what I then asked was for the carers to come back. I wanted them to be part of this research, but they were kind of like, yeah, we're happy to be part of your research. I said I want it to be participative research. And they said, yeah, so you're going to do the research then. So I said, okay. So they were very keen to be part of it, but they saw it as my thing. And actually that's kind of their decision, and I couldn't really impose upon them a participative research method when they don't want to be doing participative research, because that goes against participative research. So what they were keen to do was to actually talk about what it meant to them. And the key bits that I've picked up is that it was emotional. And actually, I've put this with this carer in the top here because she was the most emotional and the least emotional person. And yet she became most emotional in the telling of what was happening. And that was a big surprise to her. She was okay with it, and actually we all discussed it afterwards and said that was really, really important part of it. That it's complex, that it's cathartic, and actually as a group, it was the best support group I'd ever been to, this research group, because as carers together we were learning a lot from telling our stories, from being involved in this process of teaching, and that actually being able to talk about it and reflect about it afterwards was amazing. It wasn't meant to be one of the outcomes of it, but it really was. And it was really impactful, and that came from the students telling us. And a little bit about getting the lecturers, but the lecturers were the worst ones at feeding back about how useful this was. So, my conclusion. What I would say is that I think what we've learnt here is that the way of working is very transferable for other settings. And what we would like to see is that this could be actually used for more professionals and for more social formations. If you remember the final one, I think we've had quite an impact on the social formation of the University of Bath's social work department. But I think that this could be taken out, and one of the kind of next steps for the organisation and for me is around thinking, how do we take this to hospitals, GP surgeries? I couldn't find pictures for other stuff, but you know what I'm saying. Go out to all the different kind of places where carers are impacted on, and try to get them to understand all of these things that you're getting the social work students to understand. So that's my research.
We've got time for 1 or 2 questions. Sonia?
Bombarded you.
I think it's a comment more than a question, because actually my question was about your rollout, coming from a healthcare social care profession. But obviously you've clearly already started to identify the transferability.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually these are interesting because these pictures are from my organisation, and we've done some of this, but what we haven't done is that thinking through. We've kind of done it as we're going to get. So this is our local hospital talking to one of the discharge and therapeutic evaluation team, the DATE team, as they're called. So we had a date with carers. And these were carers going out and talking to these professionals. And actually, you know, that was very successful, but it was a kind of one-off. And what I'm interested in is that shared learning, and how do we reflect upon that learning and create more learning. And I sort of started looking at deep learning, not just being for the people that we're going and presenting to, but for the carers as they learn as well. So, and we've been out again to kind of GP practices a little bit, but again, it's around really sort of developing that practice.
I wondered whether you, sorry, were you, no, I just wondered, Sonia, I've always been very wary of kind of blurring, say, a workshop that I'm running with data collection, but you know, I've been, in my latest project I am doing one, I did one last night, and it's with teachers who've got a master's degree. It's about teachers' expertise, but and it's a workshop that we're offering called a masterclass, but we are data collecting and it's audio recording and so on. And I just wondered, firstly, whether you, in terms of, say, that event you were just describing, whether you think you've got the ethics, you know, you feel comfortable with it, whether there's many issues around the ethics of it, and secondly, whether you perhaps looked at, say, Engerstrom's research development workshop stuff on, because that was in health settings, you know, they used video of carers and patients, say stroke, I think it was stroke, the famous study, and then we would be like the doctors and nurses in the community in the acute, and suddenly there was these carers saying, well, it was great in the hospital, my husband started walking again, and we went out in the community, it was like, it's like they didn't know anything about us, and we had to start all over again, you know, and all that sort of thing. It's a famous study. I wonder whether, on the ethics, did you have any?
So with the ethics, I have now looked at my ethics form for this, because this was pre-PhD, if you like, so it was kind of, I was doing it for my master's. I was quite comfortable with the ethics, because I was sort of inviting the carers to be involved. At that point, they were told this would be part of research, and that they would, you know, so they were coming to it knowing that they'd be part of a research group. So it wasn't something, would you like to come and do this? Oh, and by the way, it's going to be research as well. So they were quite comfortable with the concept, and that was part of the excitement, I think, for some of them. However, what it does mean is that actually, ethically, as I said, with the participatory research, you know, I had an idea of how it would work, and actually they weren't so keen. So actually it just changes, I think, the research, and what you have to do to keep within the ethics is to allow that to change, and not, you know, you can't force it to go one way. You have to let the participants decide, and, you know, I would have liked this paper to be completely collaborative, and they would have written it with me, but they weren't interested in it, so that's fine.
I guess there are other ways of being participatory other than, you know...
And it was participatory in lots of other ways. I wanted to really, you know, get groundbreakingly write the paper together, and it all
it's just with the increasing use of video in living theory studies, you know, sort of contemporary living theory studies, you know, then we know that's Chew Magna and all that, you know, so it's all that kind of that side of it. I wondered what you felt about that, you know.
So, what I would say about the video is I started off saying, and can we video it? And they kind of went, and in the end said, no, actually no, you can't video. So in the end, video's not really been part of what I've done with this paper because they didn't want it to be. And again, that was around saying, okay, I really wanted it to be about video and I've got some video data, but that's not okay with you. So, and what they were saying was, and I think we've talked about this here, is around video changing the nature of how they didn't feel as comfortable talking to video. Although we used video as a method of teaching, so that was quite different when I talked about the video, and that was about videoing a carer who couldn't be there, so they could be there, and luckily it worked for them.
Yeah, I was thinking about that. Okay, Alison?
On that, I mean, obviously, I picked up my ears when you said they didn't want to participate, which is quite interesting after I played the other day. So, but yes, although they didn't want to participate, they were participating.
Yeah, they were fully participating in the teaching of the social work students, which, if you like, was the practice. But in the research, they weren't so interested. They were interested in the fact that it was going to get published, or hopefully published, but it was going to go to conference and be made public like it is today. But they weren't interested in writing it, but they were interested in reading it and commenting on it. So in some ways
they
they
were
have
participating
been,
to a certain
so
extent.
to an extent, I suppose not as fully as I had in my grand plans of participation.
Very interesting.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Sonia. I think we've got, just got a few minutes, and it was, where's Tracy gone?